All right. Good afternoon. Well, hey, today I'm going to talk about security awareness. I call this guaranteed failure awareness the greatest cyber insanity. And I'm not talking about how we're going to act later tonight after we've had a little bit too much to drink. But anyway, so real quick poll. Who thinks that we're doing a good job in InfoSec? Anyone? If I didn't think you were sarcastic, I'd pick on you the rest of the time. But anyway, so cyber insanity, basically, if you look at everything, we're spending, or actually our breach detection times have risen, I think by something like 12, 13 days over the last year. So now they're over 90 days. We have more breaches. Any of the security controls that we currently have can be bypassed. Ransomware incidents are increasing. And basically it boils down to a good hacker just simply can't be stopped. Now on the other side of things, cyber spending is at a record high. In fact, it's increasing by almost 10% every year, and it's expected to top globally $1 trillion between 2017 and 2021. Basically, you know, we're spending a lot more, but we're doing worse as an industry, and in no world is backwards progress or backwards movement progress. And some of the reasons I think that we're seeing this are, number one, compliance is still thought of as the destination instead of the starting line. Compliance is a great thing, but it's a starting point. It's the bare minimum set of standards, not the finish line, not the end-all be-all, if you will. Our budget, it's still being driven by compliance or risk management frameworks instead of actual risk. And in our industry, just about everything tends to be very reactive instead of proactive. Quick example of that is our encryption. Does anyone know what problems quantum computing might cause with our current encryption?
It'll be broken within minutes.
Exactly. And does anyone have any solutions for this problem? You know, it's funny, the NSA and all major governments really around the world, they're collecting every bit of data they can get their hands on, or web traffic that they can get their hands on. Why? Because they know in just a few years, maybe less, we're going to be able to decrypt any bit of that data. So, you know, from an offensive point of view, we understand that these things are highly vulnerable, but on the defensive side of things, what's the answer about this? Well, quantum computing will create a solution for the encryption problem. Well, we need a solution now, not a few years from now, and we're not really future-proofing our technology. And then the next thing is most of our technology is designed around treating symptoms of the problem instead of the actual root cause of the problem. Well, what's the biggest problem in cybersecurity?
People.
Yes. Got somebody here that's awake. Anyway, so people are the biggest problem. In fact, according to the latest Verizon data breach investigation report, they said 96% of breaches start with a phish. So people are clearly our biggest problem. So what do we do to solve this problem? Well, we assume that we can't do anything about the people, and so they're gonna click on something. So all of our technologies are after the fact. We have antivirus for after they click on something. We have our firewall for after they click on something. We have our anti-malware technology, all designed around after somebody clicks on something. Uh-oh. Losing,
What did you do, Greg?
Well, I'm just...
We're good here.
There we are. Okay. But basically, most of our technologies, they treat the symptoms of the problem instead of the actual root cause. If I get a cold and I go to the doctor, I don't want well, maybe I do want some cough syrup. Some of that stuff's pretty good. But when I go to the doctor, I'm going there for antibiotics, something to actually treat the problem. And then next is we have these dangerous misconceptions in cybersecurity. Has anyone ever heard the phrase, you can't patch stupid? Anyone ever said that phrase? Oh, come on. I know we're all guilty. But it's this dangerous misconception, and if we accept that you can't patch stupid, well, we've given up before we even tried. And basically this all boils down to the fact that all of cybersecurity, or almost all of cybersecurity, is a human problem, not a technology problem. And if we continue to try and solve the problem with nothing but technology, we're going to continue to get the exact same results we have been, which is failure. So, in cybersecurity, there's one thing that exists at every layer. And in security in general, it's composed of layers. It's the onion theory, if you will. And the only thing that exists at every single layer is humans. And when we make mistakes, then that breaks down and it can cause horrible things. So we all know that people clicking on fishes is the easiest way into any network, and a guaranteed way for hackers to get into the network. But the side of things that I think a lot of people don't think about is what happens after they get into the network. Well, the IT admins are making enough mistakes that it's guaranteed that the bad guys can get full access to anything they want. No joke, I saw one time, this was sort of hilarious, but scary and stupid at the same time, had a pen test where the IT director, who knew the pen test was going to start 5 days later, decides, well, I want to test out a self-password reset tool. And so he puts Manage Engine on the perimeter. And actually connects it, gives it an external IP address. But on top of that, doesn't bother to change the default credentials. And these are self-populating default credentials at that. And it's connected to their Active Directory. So within minutes of starting the pen test, we find this Manage Engine. And I didn't even have to look up what the default credentials were because, well, they're self-populating. I just had to click log in. And as soon as I log in, it says, would you like to sync your credentials or your credential database or with an external database or whatever it said? And I said, yes, I would. And we had full access to all of their credentials and domain admin and whatnot, within minutes. And so this is a big problem. Domain admins, in fact, I was on a pen test last week where I found a spreadsheet with 3 different domain admin passwords in it. This is something that we all know about, but our IT ops are still making big mistakes. And then on top of that, then we have our defenders. And nothing against blue teamers. There's some great blue teamers out there. But there's a lot of blue teamers who haven't even ever read or maybe don't even know about the MITRE ATT&CK framework and the types of, things that the bad guys are actually doing. And so then you've got this element where now the defenders, the cybersecurity professionals, are going to guarantee that it takes that much longer for them to detect you once you're in the network. And so it's this series of human failures that create this perfect storm, and it's the reason that we continue to fail. So how do we fix the problem? Well, I think we should stop focusing so much on education, because frankly, computers are a little bit like people, or I guess people are a little bit like computers. They're difficult to train, but pretty easy to program. So we need to do more with conditioning and sort of programming, if you will, our users. And so I've got here the 4 E's of security awareness, and each of these are incredibly important. The number 1 thing on here is entertaining. Has anyone ever enjoyed security awareness training? No? Anyone done the DoD training before? No, was that miserable? Exactly. And so most training is just miserable. It's boring. It's not entertaining. And so 90%, if not more, of what we're teaching our users gets lost on deaf ears because they just don't care. Why would you care? I've been through that training many years in a row, the exact same boring thing, and it was horrible. And I'm in security. You'd think I would care, but no, this training just made me not care about security. So we need to do better about making stuff entertaining. The next thing is it needs to be encompassing. So when we think of security awareness, typically we're thinking about nothing but the basic security awareness. Well, what's the difference between HTTP and HTTPS? Think before you click, hover before you click, hover over the link. And, we go to all of this stuff, but we're missing other elements of security awareness training, like educating our IT ops about common mistakes that are made, which make it very easy for anyone to take control of the entire network. What about our executives who are C-suite, who don't understand cybersecurity, and so they're not leading, and because of it, it's difficult to get budget and the proper support that you need. Maybe they need a little bit more education around cybersecurity so that they can better understand what's happening, what risks it poses to the organization. And there's a million other areas of cybersecurity training that we should be adding in above and beyond the basic security awareness. Next, it needs to be engaging. Users have to care. If we're not making users care, then we're not doing good enough in our training, and ultimately we're going to fail. But most importantly, and the reason I have it at the center, is it needs to be effective. How do you measure? Anyone got any ideas how you might measure effectiveness of a security awareness program? No one? I believe there's only one metric that matters here, and that is, does it lower our incidents? Does it reduce incidents? If it's not reducing incidents, then it's not effective. We can look at other metrics like, I don't know, fish clicks all day long, and that's a valid metric, but at the end of the day, if it's not driving down the number of incidents we have, it's worthless. What we're doing isn't really helping us. So from here, I'm going to jump into the top 10 what I call epic security awareness fails. And I think the biggest one here is that we tend to have underqualified and overworked staff running our programs. Now, it's not that security staff are underqualified in security. It's that they're not educators. They don't understand psychology. They don't, man, I keep knocking this thing out. But anyway, they don't understand security. Not security. They don't understand education. And so as a result of that, is that going to come back on? Uh-oh. Hold on. That closed the program, huh? Since when does unplugging the HDMI cable close the program? Hold on. Bear with me here. All right. So they don't understand psychology, and then the next thing is that we take people that already have dashboard overload. Anyone in here on a blue team? Do you have plenty of time in the day to do everything that you need, and maybe extra bandwidth where you could add in a few more chores? No? No? Do you have plenty of staff in your team? No? See, that's the thing. And so what we do is then we take and we hand our defenders a tool. It doesn't matter how great the tool is. If they don't have time to manage the tool, it's not gonna be utilized. And so the best tool in the world is worthless if it's not being used. I know because I have quite a few tools in my garage that have never even been, opened out of the box. I like to think that I'm a handyman sort of guy, and until I actually get around to it, and then I realize, no, I'm the guy that hires or calls the handyman and asks them to come out and fix something. But the best tool in the world is still worthless if we're not effectively using it. And this is not moving forward. Wow. Technical issues here, huh? Let's try this again. Okay, so here's a quick story about a client, and bear with me. Apparently, today is the day of technical issues. But I recently did a penetration test, and we had this client. They had 2,500 employees. They were designated U.S. critical infrastructure, and some of the stuff that they were doing was a little bit scary. How easy it was for us to take control, of course. For the 2,500 employee organization, they had a total of 3 cybersecurity staff. One of which was the CISO, not discounting CISOs here at all, but at the same time, most CISOs aren't hands-on down the day-to-day operations, which means for actual operators working day-to-day, they only had 2 people in this company. So they're already dealing with that dashboard overload, and the CTO just decides, hey, we're going to purchase KnowBe4 without even asking the security staff their opinion or anything, throws it at them, and at the end of the year, they sent a total of 2 phishes with that tool. So I don't care how affordable it was, 2 phishes is not very, effective use of the tool. In fact, there's open source tools you could probably use that would have been cheaper if you're only going to send 2. And of course, we were not only able to break in, but we were able to take full control of everything. And this particular one, was the level of access that we got and the things that we could have done were very scary. We could have caused massive loss of life. We could have caused major natural disasters, or not natural disasters, but disasters, environmental disasters. And so it was a little bit scary. And I bring that up because if we're not phishing our users enough, which I'm going to get into later, our users won't be prepared. And of course, they're going to be very vulnerable. Now, the next thing is that we tend to have poor user engagement. Do you think your users care about cybersecurity? Yeah, most of the time, users don't care about cybersecurity, unfortunately. But there's also this false sense of security. Did you know that some users actually think that the network is so secure that nothing they could possibly do would get them infected? In fact, I read a recent study that I thought was a little bit hilarious and scary at the same time, where they surveyed a bunch of users and they found that these users, it was very common where they would have some sort of suspicious, shady link that they didn't trust clicking on at home. And so they would go to work to click on that because they wanted to, and they thought that their work network and computer systems were so secure that they could open anything up over there. And so they take this phish, they forward it to the work email, and now they're opening it there. Makes sense, right? So users have this false sense of security. The next thing is, does anyone penalize their users for causing, let's say, a ransomware outbreak? No? What about rewarding your users for secure behavior? Anyone reward your users? Maybe an extra bonus at the end of the year if they've been reporting phishes, they haven't clicked on anything? So that's another one of the big problems. See, employees are motivated by what? Money. So if they have no reward for good behavior and no consequences for bad behavior, where's their motivation to be secure and to keep the organization secure? They don't have it. The next thing is there's rarely good top-down support. So one of the things when we start a security awareness program, when we go through the kickoff and we say, hey, listen, here's an email, sort of sample email, but what we need you to do is send out an email to all of your staff from the CEO saying that this is a very important top priority for the company. Guess who sends that email 99% of the time? The CISO. And it's nothing against the CISO because I love CISOs, but at the same time, do you think the employees give a crap about the CISO as much as they care about the CEO? So, and that's the thing. And in fact, it's sort of hilarious. When I do pen tests, it's very frequent that the IT director will cheat, if you will. So as soon as they tell me, hey, we want you to run the phish by us before you send it out, I know what that means. That means they're going to forward that phish that I send them to the entire company and say, don't click on this. The thing is I'm not worried about it. Do you know why I'm not worried about it? Because they're going to click. And in fact, when I get in their email, it's not uncommon that I see that message, mass email sent out to the entire organization saying, don't click on this, and that's not been read. But my phish was read and it was clicked on. So to that regard, if you have a trending threat of a phish, what do you think is a better approach to warning your users? Emulating that threat and creating a phish and phishing all of your users with that threat that you're worried about, or sending an email saying don't click on this? We need to be emulating those threats. In fact, I saw a study that said something like users were I forget the exact number, it was around 70% less likely to click on a phish if they had seen it before. So if they're seeing it from us, the good guys first, they're much less likely to fall for it if they see it in the wild. And then the next thing is we have a lack of emotional tie-in to what we're doing. And the next thing is that we tend to not have that user performance feedback. Does anyone work at an organization where they phish you? No one? Okay. Anyone get regular progress updates as to how secure they are as a user? Do you think that might help you be more secure if you knew where you stood, how well you were doing? So we're missing that performance feedback. And then the next thing is that we're not collecting a lot of data around human security. Now, we're finally starting to get a little bit better with, behavioral biometrics, but a lot of that's, where we're getting good data. It's looking at things like, what time am I logging in, and from where in the world am I logging in, and what type of activities do I have while I'm in the networks and in the systems, things such as what files am I accessing. But when it comes to social engineering and security awareness and phishing, which is our biggest threat, what data do we typically have? Did they click yes or no? If yes, which phish did they click on? That's about the extent of our data when it comes to people. And so there's a lot more that we could be asking, like who's participating, who needs to improve on what. I got one that's fun. How long before our users relapse after we've educated them? That's a fun one. And the thing is, really, if we can think it, we should be measuring it, because you can collect all the data in the world. In fact, storage is cheap. So it's not a big deal to collect data, even if you don't have a clue how you're going to use it, or even if it's valuable, because I can't go back in time and collect data after the fact. But I can collect data right now and try and figure out what I'm going to do with it long down the road. And so if you can think it, measure it. And then the next thing is we don't have a lot of insight into our risk. And so one of the things with all of our security investments, especially around security awareness, we're not defining our KPIs before we go in. Well, how do I measure success? How do I know if what I'm doing is actually working? The next thing is, which employees present the most risk to my organization? How about what departments present the most risk to my organization? And do I have some locations that might present more risk than others? In fact, we've found quite a few organizations that had specific locations, where they had twice or 3 times the phish click count of any other location within the organization. So if we're not measuring these things, we won't know. Maybe we have a cultural issue over there. Or maybe it's just my entire sales team in that office, and that's the reason they're clicking on 3 times more phish. But, we need to be looking at those things. And then, who's improving and who isn't improving? Do I have somebody that's just perpetually clicking on everything other than the educational emails? Maybe if it's a phish, they'll click on it all day long. In fact, we had one user last year that clicked on 11 phishes in 1 year. But we kept phishing them and phishing them and phishing them. And after their 11th click, they have, at this point, not clicked on a single thing now in 5 months. And that's because we increased the amount of phishes this user was getting to the point that I think we sent them 36 phishes over the course of a year. The more they clicked on, the more we sent them until they finally quit clicking. But and then there's other things. Everyone has heard, or most people would assume, sales is the most likely to click on a phish, right? So, and they are, by the way. In fact, they're way more likely to click on a phish than any other department within the organization. Number 2, though, that we found is developers. Developers are very likely to click on phish. Now, the reason I bring this up is because sales and developers, they don't click on the same type of phishes. So understanding who is clicking on what and what departments are susceptible to what types of phish can help you increase the effectiveness of your programs. So salespeople, they will click on anything social media themed. Whereas you get to developers, and yes, they love to click, but they will click on anything business communications themed or security themed. And so it's a very different risk that they pose, and understanding that can help us do better with our users, with our education initiatives, and most importantly, in reducing risk. And another thing that we have been tracking is who has access. We call them sensitive information users. Could be HR with access to all of your payroll and your employee information, or it could be somebody in finance. Or maybe your domain admins that have the keys to the kingdom. And so what we found is that more often than not, when we start measuring how much of the user base has a high level of access versus how much risk they actually pose to the organization, we found that more often than not, they propose a significantly higher risk to the organization than anyone else. In fact, we had one company, it was around 15% of their users were deemed sensitive information users. And that 15% represented 32% of their fish clicks. That's scary, isn't it? When our people that we give the keys to the kingdom to are the ones that are clicking on everything. So I had a question a little while back, and I said, I want to know what percentage of users present how much risk to the organization. Because I figured there's probably a little bit of an 80-20 rule here. And in fact, it's far beyond the 80-20 rule because we found that 1.19% of users actually represented 89.82% of phishing risk. Now, this is again with the data that I have, but I've talked to a lot of CISOs, and their numbers are backing this up. They're seeing the exact same thing. And so this is a trend. Just a very, very small portion of our users represent most of our risk within our organizations. Now, that's both good and bad. The good news is that it's a small group of people we have to fix to have a massive impact on our overall security and to reduce our risk. The bad news is that's a very, very difficult group to actually get to stop clicking. And so that brings me to the next point, which is low frequency training. How many people do ongoing security awareness training at their organizations? Awesome. How frequent? Once a year. Okay, so that's typically what we're seeing is, this once a year, and then maybe we supplement it. And the most common thing that I see is adding a security awareness statement to the company newsletter. Does anyone read the company newsletter? Anyone at all? Because I've never read it, but I know that when I talk to people and I say, well, what do you do for ongoing awareness education? They say, oh, well, we put something in the newsletter. But I guess my problem there is no one reads it. Maybe instead of putting it in the newsletter, we should put it on pay stubs. Who reads their pay stub? Anyone? No? Okay. Well, I still think it might be slightly more effective. We could put security awareness messages on desktop backgrounds. There's so many places where we could incorporate what we're doing to have more frequent training. But on top of that, there's this lack of repetition in security awareness training. So in advertising, everyone knows you have to constantly barrage somebody with the message before they're going to remember it. Unless it's something like, one of these big budget Super Bowl ads, then it might be clever enough and humorous enough or have that emotional tie-in where you'll remember it. But security awareness is very similar to advertising or marketing in the fact that we need repetition if we want our people to remember what we're teaching them. And so we're not keeping security front of mind. I touched on this earlier that we're not taking advantage of all touch points. So anyone have cybersecurity awareness like posters up in their break rooms? So what about on the internet? So there's a lot more places that we can put this message to keep people or to keep security front of mind. And the reality is our threats, they're evolving daily. It's not an annual or quarterly thing. And so if we're only educating our users once a year, then we're failing to address the changing and evolving threats. And the next thing is that if I'm only educating you once a year, it tends to cause me to get into the weeds as an educator. So now I've got 10 million topics that I have to cover in this annual training. And so now my training tends to get overly complex. And this subject that already intimidated the users, now we're just proving to them, yes, it is way too complex. There's no way you're ever going to understand it because we're getting into the weeds. And so then the next one, and I think it's number 5. You can't see the numbers on there. But number 5 on the top 10 countdown is boring content. It's I don't have to say much here. We've all been through it. Most content is way too lengthy. Even if you take like SANS, it's still 3.5 or 4 minutes of, education that's very dry, it's not entertaining people, and that's an example of the good side of this. Whereas there's other security awareness training that's, an hour long of boring, and no one's paying attention to anything. And then we've got overly complex messaging. Has anyone ever seen one of those phishing landing pages that's something like, the 15 ways to avoid clicking on a fish? Anyone ever seen that? So here's the problem I have with that. Do we really need to educate users on 15 ways to avoid clicking on a fish, or is think before you click maybe all the messaging that we need? Maybe we can simplify things a lot more to have better results. And of course, it doesn't entertain and it tends to intimidate people. But beyond that, it's painful to watch. So I'm going to play a quick video here and we'll see if we have audio. And hopefully you'll enjoy it. But the idea here is to show you, this was a sample video that I created just specifically for this talk to show that it's easy to create entertaining content that users will actually enjoy. So here it is. We don't have audio. Let's see. Oh well. I guess we're not going to do this. Catch me later. I can send you a link. But it was meant to be, funny. I was told we had audio, but I don't know what's going on. Anyway, so then the next thing is one size fits all. And, later I can show you the video. But, in our educational programs, what we're doing is we're applying the exact same training to every single person in the company. So what happens? Our users who are less secure, that create a lot of risk for the organization, they don't get as much education as they need. Now our users that don't pose a lot of risk to the organization, that are very secure, they get way more education than they need. It's not efficient, and it's this middle ground that causes everything we do to fail. And so our programs need to adapt to the individual user's needs or risks. The next thing is that our phishing exercises should adapt as well. And our different people actually pose different levels of risk to the organization. If I am a domain admin and I'm clicking on fishes, is that a big deal? Do you think I should be a domain admin if I'm clicking on fishes? Maybe not. So, different users do present different risk, and beyond that, different users need different education. If I'm handling wire transfers every day, that's a good bit of risk. I need to be educated on, best practices, on common scams that might try and target me so that I'm not likely to click on it. But somebody not likely to fall for it. But somebody that doesn't have that access, they may not need the same level of training as me. And then the next thing is that not everyone learns the same way. There's visual learners, there's auditory learners, there's a lot of different learning styles. And so by treating everyone the exact same, we're not adapting to the individual. And the next thing is one size is simply inefficient. What's the holy grail of business? Doing more with less. In education, we actually have an opportunity to do more with less. All we have to do is start customizing to the individual. Because that number that I showed you earlier, 1.19% of our users are causing a majority of our risk. Which means we can get really invasive with 1% and do a little bit less with everyone else. And we've actually not only increased the efficiency of our program, but we've also increased the effectiveness, all while doing less as a whole. And so it's less employee disruption, which is what people want. And, different people have different needs. And so to that, I ask, are we setting ourselves up for failure as an industry, especially when it comes to security awareness? We're basically doing the exact same thing. Most organizations are doing the exact same thing now that they were doing in the 90s. And they're wondering why it's not working. Well, times have changed. We have to adapt accordingly. And then the next thing is that we're missing our just-in-time engagement. Anyone, when they phish their users as part of their educational programs, does anyone send them to a landing page to see if they'll, enter a password or open an attachment? So I argue that unless we're doing a red team assessment, we should not be doing that. The reason is because at the moment a mistake is realized, that user is uniquely susceptible to learning. So if we just exploit them, we're not taking advantage of that opportunity to educate them. And so, beyond just not taking advantage of that opportunity to educate them right now, does it really matter if they type in their password? Did they not already click? Could there be a browser 0 day behind it, or maybe just you didn't update Flash? And then the browser, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Once they've clicked, we may as well just assume it's game over. And so at that point, we should be sending them to some sort of landing page to capitalize on that. And so when they realize their mistake, it actually helps to anchor that lesson in memory. Now, the next thing is, when people click on phishes, more often than not, they don't get a follow-up email to their inbox telling them that they just clicked on a phish and telling them what the red flags were in that phish and how they could have avoided it. And one of the problems I have with that is that now, if they're not getting any feedback here, now, for as far as that user knows, maybe they don't even realize they clicked on a phish. But even if they do, we're not encouraging them to sort of report anything where they're not getting that feedback. We're not giving them any feedback. So it could have been a bad guy, could have been a good guy. And so we're not providing that level of insight. We exploit instead of condition, and then the next thing is most often we're not just picking up the phone and calling somebody. What I found is one of the most effective things we can do for these, what I call chronic clickers, just pick up the phone and call them. And it's not a matter of telling them, hey, you've been clicking on everything, you're a horrible user, that maybe you'll have to escalate to that at some point, but doing nothing more than saying, hey, I noticed you've been struggling on some of these phishing programs. Just so you know, the information security team's here for you. If you ever have any questions, can I answer anything for you? You don't actually have to criticize them. As soon as there's that human connection, they're more motivated now to be secure and to do things right. And so just a simple phone call without even lecturing them can increase your effectiveness. And then the next thing is that we have these overly complex landing pages. Like I said, 15 ways to avoid clicking on a phish. And so here's an example of a, follow-up email that we could do. And here's what I think makes a really effective landing page. Oh, I forgot, we don't have audio. There's a siren playing right now, but we use this as a landing page for these users that are clicking on everything. And I promise, this is a more effective landing page than telling them 15 ways to avoid clicking on it. And what's the messaging here? Is there anything? No. Because we don't need it. They already know they made a mistake. And so letting them sort of educate themselves and sort of helping them to is actually more effective. And so, again, are we setting ourselves up for failure? Now, the next thing is that we're missing emotional anchoring. There is, in education in general, there is a dangerous lack of psychology that's being employed in education. We definitely need to use it, but especially in security awareness, we're not following basic psychology principles in order to make things more effective. So emotional anchoring, it increases retention. It actually helps to build that impact. Has anyone ever watched the Super Bowl in large part for the ads? Or anyone enjoy them? Yeah. And why do you enjoy those ads? Do they make you laugh? Budweiser is a great example. They will either make you laugh or make you cry, but they understand a basic principle of getting their message across, and that is emotional anchoring. So they use emotion in their advertising, and you remember their ads. Anyone? What's the first Budweiser ad that comes to mind? Anyone? For me, I'm thinking the frogs, but, or that, what's up one from way back in the day. But, the whole point is that we remember these things because they're using that emotion. They're using psychology to help get better messaging or to help get better retention. And we're not doing this. And it helps to push better engagement. And, it's proven. And so then that brings me to the number one biggest mistake that we make in cybersecurity awareness, and that is lousy human virus definitions. I love this meme. What if I told you your brain is the best antivirus? And it's so true. Has anyone ever got a phish in their inbox and they didn't even have to open it, they didn't even have to look at it, immediately they knew it was a phish, but you couldn't articulate why? Without looking at it. Before you look. I bring that up because I've seen it happen even with me. Yeah, if I start looking in, I can find reasons that that's a phish, but before I've identified those, immediately I get a red flag in my head that says, oh, something's off about this. And that is my subconscious clicking in. And so the bandwidth, I forget the exact numbers, but the difference between the conscious and the subconscious in terms of how fast that it's processing data is significant. So no exaggeration. If the conscious brain is working at, let's say, 1 mile an hour, the subconscious brain is working at 500 miles an hour. And so what we want to do is we want to get our users' subconscious triggering and telling them, don't click on this. There's something fishy about that. No pun intended. Well, maybe a little bit. But we need to be educating or planting those human virus definitions. And so how do we plant human virus definitions in our users? We phish them. More phishing equals more virus definitions. If we can prepare our users for every type of threat, if they see it from us first, then they are significantly less likely to fall for it when they see it in the wild. It's the most important thing that we can do in security awareness. So I want to poll the audience. How many people phish their users at least once a year? Anyone phish their users once a month? So I actually, with the users that I educate, I phish everyone a minimum of twice per month. A minimum. Those are my good users. I actually have high-risk users, the people that click on everything, that I will phish as many as 8 times in a single month. Why? Because that's how I get them to stop clicking. You know, if we look at the United States military, we've got, we're a world superpower. Why are we a superpower? Is it because our military is really great at educating? Or is it maybe because we're really great at conditioning? So it's not that we don't do good at education in the military, but it's the conditioning that makes it so that our soldiers are prepared when, for lack of a better term, shit hits the fan. And that's exactly what we need to be doing with our users. And so we need to condition our users to watch for red flags, and we need to be simulating any of these attacks. And then the next thing is, the only fix for spear phishing is spear phishing your users. I've seen where, we would start off at an engagement, and when we send that first spear phish, we're seeing 35% of users clicking on phishes. Within just a few months of regular high frequency phishing, we're seeing those numbers drop to fractions of a percent. We had, recently, I put out this challenge. I teach social engineering classes. And so I was in Hawaii teaching an advanced social engineering class, and I put out a challenge to my audience. I got one of my clients, I said, listen, will you let me phish you or will you let my students phish you as part of the class? And they said, sure. And so I tell the class, I said, we're going to spend this entire time, I'm going to teach you how to do all of your OSINT, your research, how to come up with a pretext. And at the end of this, I'm going to have you actually put this in use and put everything you've learned to action and create a phish. And what I want to see is if you can get anyone at this organization to click. Well, this particular organization, we have drove phish clicks so low that it's below 0.1%. And so it's very, very difficult to phish them with any success. And so the class, they go on and they find a job listing that is done through their human resources software. They were using this company called Bamboo HR. And so we think, wow, this could be an interesting pretext for a phish. And so they go and they buy bamboohr.com.co. which the actual website's just bamboohr.com. And then they come up with a fish and they send it from the CEO saying, hey, we've had a data breach and your human resources information was included in it. Click here for your free credit monitoring. Anyone think that that would be an effective fish? Not one single click. And nearly 70% of their users actually reported this fish. And I bring that up because we can do better. If that company can see results like that, any company can see results like that. Can we stop 100% of fish clicks? No. But if we can stop 99.9% of fish clicks, that will have a significant improvement or effect on our bottom line. It will reduce our malware significantly, our number of incidents significantly. And so we got to do better. And so that brings me to sort of the recap or the top 10. So number 10 is that we have underqualified and overworked staff running our security awareness initiatives. We're not educators. I'm sorry, cybersecurity people should not be handling anything education. They get in the weeds, they make it too complex, and just in general, it causes our programs to be less effective because they're not educators. We have poor user engagement. We have poor missing data collection. We have very little risk insight when it comes to our people. In fact, does anyone actually rank their people high, medium, and low risk based on their actions? Do you think that might be effective? What kind of fun things could we do if we had a list of all of our high-risk users? And I don't mean the users with a lot of access, but all of our users that like to click on things a lot and open the company to risk. What might we be able to do with that? We might be able to segment all of these users off onto their own separate VLAN to help minimize our risk. If we have a domain admin maybe pop in there, we can remove their credentials until they become more secure. And so having this better insight can help us significantly. We're using boring content. We have one-size-fits-all training. Number 3 is missing just-in-time or JIT engagement. And number 2 is missing emotional anchoring. And then number 1, biggest mistake we're making is lousy human virus definitions. Phishing once a year, not enough. Phishing once a quarter, not enough. I would argue we should be phishing our users, even weekly, because the bad guys aren't worried about some schedule. The bad guys are constantly in our users' inboxes. And so to me, the only question is, do we want the bad guys to be the only ones in our users' inboxes, or do we want to be there too? Because we can try and block everything, but it only takes one getting through, and it's very difficult to block a spearfish because there's no definitions for them. I mean, all they have to do is go set up a Google business account, and that can bypass 99.9% of spam filters. So, we got to do better. And so, before I open it up to questions, I do have some sort of closing thoughts here. Does anyone have children? I have some children, and they've recently learned to drive. That was very nerve-wracking and scary, still is. But it got me to thinking. What kind of crazy parent would let their 13-year-old climb in a car and drive across town with no understanding or no practice or driving training whatsoever? Would anyone do that? No. And why wouldn't we do that? Because they might kill themselves. But then on the other side of things, with our people, our employees, we tend to let them access our computer systems and our networks without any training. They're essentially that 13-year-old that doesn't know how to drive that we just said, hey, yeah, go on a cross-country road trip. No big deal. Have some fun. And so what happens is that our employees might end up killing our business as a result of that. It is very similar, and so I ask once again, are we setting ourselves up for failure in security awareness? Any questions? No one? Man, you've been such a quiet audience today. I know it's 4 o'clock. Yeah, we could see.
So it's going to be picked up through this, so if you can just get the speaker.
Okay.
I think that's...
Well, let's do it.
I didn't want to jump up and interrupt you.
No worries. That's on the internal. Oh, hold on. this cord is so thick that there's not really enough room to plug it in and have the laptop up here. All right, let's try this again. Ready? All right. So that's just sort of an example of how we can do a lot more. And in fact, when it comes to education, there's this thing called the Fair Use Act. It basically means that you can take any content and reuse it for education, and like anything on YouTube, you can start incorporating these videos in, and you can do it completely legally because of the Fair Use Act, and because it's education, it's not an issue to go on and sort of do those things. So just FYI, it makes it incredibly easy. There's so much content out there. So, let's get creative. Find some fun and entertaining ways to educate our users. Any questions? Anyone? Well, thank you so much. Thank you.